It was a hot summer night in Las Vegas, and the excitement in the Sands Hotel showroom was palpable. The night was set to be monumental. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, was back. After a 4-year hiatus from the stage and just a few months removed from military service, he was ready to prove that the army hadn't killed the magic that had once set him apart as a cultural force. The audience, having paid top dollar for a front-row seat to witness history, buzzed with anticipation. Elvis, just 25 years old, paced nervously backstage, adjusting his jacket for what seemed like the 100th time. He wasn't just performing. He was reclaiming his throne. His nervous energy betrayed him. He had spent years away from the stage, and the pressure to maintain his image was overwhelming. But what Elvis didn't know was that, and sitting in a dimly lit corner booth, one of the legends of Las Vegas, Dean Martin, was watching with a mischievous smile. Dean was 43 at the time, in the prime of his career. He had conquered Hollywood, music, and television. His charm, wit, and smooth performances made him a household name, the quintessential leading man. But Dean was bored. He had played the part for too long, the cool, smooth operator who could do no wrong. What he craved was chaos, unpredictability, something to shake up the predictability of his world. And that's when the idea hit him. He could challenge Elvis, not just to a duel of egos, but to something far more interesting, a dance-off. Dean and Elvis were from two different worlds. Elvis had become a symbol of youth and rebellion, a new force in music that pushed boundaries with every movement. Dean, and on the other hand, represented the older generation, the smooth, sophisticated entertainer. But hidden beneath Dean's suave persona was something few knew, a former dancer from his youth. Before fame, before the glitzy Hollywood lifestyle, there was a time when Dean was a dancer in the steel mills of Steubenville, Ohio, honing his craft in forgotten dance halls. Dean had hidden this part of himself for years, burying it beneath the smooth-talking, whiskey-sipping image that Hollywood demanded. But now, with Elvis pacing backstage, seemingly unsure of his own comeback, Dean saw an opportunity. He wasn't going to let Elvis steal the show without a challenge. Dean, with a grin on his face, shared his plan with Frank Sinatra, a fellow member of the infamous Rat Pack. "I'm going to challenge the kid to a dance-off," Dean said, taking a slow sip from his drink. Frank, who was always prepared for Dean's antics, nearly choked on his own drink. "Dean, are you out of your mind? He's half your age and you think you can outdance him?" Dean smirked. "That's exactly what I want people to think. That's what will make it interesting." And with that, Dean stood up from his booth, slowly making his way to the stage. The room was already buzzing with the electric energy of Elvis's performance. Elvis had just started his second song, Hound Dog, and the crowd was in a frenzy. But as Dean walked toward the stage, the mood shifted. Whispers filled the air. People started to notice the familiar figure approaching the stage. Was that Dean Martin? What was he doing? As Elvis sang, he looked up from the stage and saw Dean walking toward him. For a split second, a panic flashed across Elvis's face. What was Dean up to? Was he about to embarrass him? He faltered slightly in his performance, his voice wavering ever so slightly. But the band kept playing, and Elvis, despite his nerves, regained his confidence. Dean reached the stage, climbed the steps, and grabbed the microphone. A hush fell over the crowd as they wondered what would happen next. Elvis, caught off guard, stood frozen. Dean's voice broke the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been sitting back there watching this young man shake his hips for the last 10 minutes, and I have to say something." The audience held their breath, unsure of where this was going. Was Dean about to criticize Elvis? Would this be a moment of humiliation for the young king? But Dean's next words stunned them all. "Kid, I'll bet you $1,000 I can outdance you right here, right now. Your moves versus mine. Let the crowd decide who wins." The room erupted into a cacophony of shocked gasps and wild applause. No one had seen anything like this before. Dean Martin was challenging Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, to a dance-off. Elvis, however, was no stranger to challenges. His whole career had been built on overcoming expectations, on shocking the world with his talent. For a brief moment, confusion flashed on Elvis's face, but it quickly morphed into something else: competition. Elvis wasn't about to back down from a challenge. He grabbed the microphone and responded with a cocky smile. "Mr. Martin, with all due respect, that's the easiest $1,000 I'll ever make." Dean's grin widened. "Let's do this then." The band leader looked at both men. She confused and panicked. "What song?" he asked. "Doesn't matter," Dean replied casually. "Just keep a beat." And with that, the battle began. The air in the Sands Hotel showroom felt charged as the two icons prepared for a moment that would become part of Las Vegas history. The band, unsure of what was about to happen but sensing the drama unfolding, started to play a simple, medium-tempo blues track. It wasn't flashy or high energy. It was the perfect neutral choice, giving both men a level playing field. Dean looked at Elvis and gestured for him to go first. "After all, kid, it's your show," he said with a grin. Elvis, not one to back down from a challenge, stepped forward with that signature swagger that had made him a cultural icon. The crowd cheered as he took center stage, his body already moving to the beat. The familiar hip swivels, leg shakes, and shoulder rolls that had once scandalized America on television were back. Elvis was in his element, the rhythm of his body in perfect sync with the music. The audience screamed as he flawlessly executed his signature moves, moving with a magnetic energy that made everyone in the room feel like they were part of the performance. For a moment, Dean stood back, watching the young king of rock and roll with admiration. Elvis's energy was undeniable, but as the song progressed, Dean's mind began to focus on the task at hand: outperforming him. It wasn't about making Elvis look bad or embarrassing him in front of the crowd. It was about showing that even at 43, Dean still had something special, something the audience hadn't seen in years. It was about reminding the world that Dean Martin wasn't just the charming, a drunken entertainer people thought him to be. He had layers, talents that hadn't been on display in decades. When Elvis finished his first set of moves, he stopped, breathless, and gave a playful bow. He handed the stage back to Dean with a smirk. "Your turn, old man," he said, clearly confident in his victory. The crowd, still reeling from Elvis's performance, was already cheering for him, the young upstart who had come to reclaim his crown. They hadn't seen what Dean had up his sleeve. No one had. Dean calmly removed his jacket and handed it to a nearby audience member. He loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. There was a quiet pause in the room. The audience had been caught up in Elvis's charm, but now, as Dean began to move, it became clear that they were about to witness something entirely unexpected. Dean started slowly, uneasing into the rhythm, his movements seemingly casual at first. But as his feet tapped the ground, the sharp sound of rhythm echoed through the showroom, catching everyone off guard. Tap dancing, crisp, fast, and precise. His feet moved so quickly they blurred with the beat. The crowd fell silent in awe as Dean transitioned seamlessly into swing dancing, the kind of energetic, fast-paced movement that was so distinct it could only come from someone with years of training and experience. The room was captivated by the power and control Dean exuded in every move, the swinging, the spins, the rapid footwork. It was like a live jazz performance in motion, a testament to his long-forgotten dance training. But then, Dean did something that absolutely no one expected. At the height of the performance, he dropped into a full split, holding it for a moment that felt like an eternity. At 43, with the eyes of the entire room on him, he held the position, then bounced back up effortlessly as if he had the body of a man half his age. The crowd gasped in disbelief, unsure of what they were witnessing. This wasn't the image of Dean Martin they had all been sold. This wasn't the lazy, smooth operator with a glass of whiskey in hand. This was the man from Steubenville, the dancer, the artist, the one who had buried his talents beneath an image he had never truly chosen for himself. And then, just when they thought it couldn't get any more impressive, Dean did something even more unexpected. He executed a flawless backflip. The showroom went completely silent for a beat, the sound of his feet landing ringing through the space like a thunderclap. Then it erupted, and the crowd stood on their feet, clapping, whistling, and screaming in awe. The women were crying, some in disbelief, others in pure admiration. The men were shouting. No one had ever seen Dean Martin like this, so alive, so dynamic, so present in a way that completely defied the character he had spent years perfecting. Elvis, his mouth agape, stood there staring at Dean, his eyes wide with wonder. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. Dean smiled calmly, as if he had just done something as simple as stepping onto a stage. He walked over to Elvis, who was still in shock, and casually asked, "So, kid, who won?" Elvis took a moment, his eyes still wide, then started to laugh. He couldn't help it. He bent over in laughter, the kind that only comes from deep appreciation and surprise. "I think we have a winner," Elvis finally said, on raising Dean's hand high in the air. The crowd went wild. This was the moment no one could have predicted. It wasn't just a dance-off. It was an unmasking, a revealing of two men who had more depth than the world had ever known. Dean, however, wasn't interested in the $1,000 he had bet on the challenge. "Keep your money," he told Elvis with a grin. "But I tell you what, finish your show and I'll come back for your last song. Let's show these people what happens when two generations team up." Elvis, ever the showman, grinned back. "Deal." Dean walked off stage and returned to his booth, where Frank Sinatra was waiting, staring at him in utter disbelief. "How long have you been able to do that?" Frank asked, still in shock. Dean, not breaking his casual demeanor, looked at his friend and replied, "Since I was 15. Then, with a smirk, and he added, "And you never asked." The show continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. Elvis had regained his composure, finishing his set with renewed confidence. But the real magic had already happened. It wasn't about who won the dance-off. It was about what happened after. Backstage, the adrenaline was still running high. Dean had shown the world a side of himself no one had expected, and Elvis had shown that he, too, was more than just a rock-and-roll rebel. When the show ended and the lights dimmed, Elvis made his way to Dean's dressing room. He knocked on the door, and when Dean called him in, the young king entered with a different look in his eyes. He was no longer just the performer. He was the student, looking for something more. "That was incredible," Elvis said, still in awe of the performance he had just witnessed. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Dean, taking a drag from his cigarette, smiled. "Ohio. Long time ago. Different life." Elvis sat down, his curiosity evident. "You were a professional dancer?" Dean shook his head. "Not professional. Just good. Won some competitions, taught lessons. It was the Depression. You took whatever work you could get." The conversation turned personal. Elvis, who had spent his life in the spotlight, revealed his own frustrations with the image that had been created for him, the rock and roll rebel, the dangerous icon. He wanted more. He wanted to sing gospel, to act in serious films. But every time he tried to break free, the industry pushed him back into the box they had created for him. Dean, recognizing the struggle in Elvis's voice, gave him advice that would stick with him for the rest of his life. "The box only works if you stay in it, but here's the secret. You're the biggest thing in entertainment right now. You make the rules. If you want to sing gospel, sing gospel. If you want to act in serious films, do it. They'll complain, they'll tell you it's career suicide, but if you're good enough, if you're real enough, the audience will follow you. Don't let anyone tell you what you're capable of." Elvis listened intently, taking in every word. It was advice that would shape the trajectory of his career, leading to the famous 1968 comeback special that showed Elvis in a way the world had never seen before. A complete artist, capable of far more than just rock and roll. Dean's words gave him the confidence to break free from the box and redefine himself. It was a quiet moment, but one that would have a profound impact on both of their lives. Dean and Elvis, from different generations and worlds, had found common ground. Their connection wasn't just about music or dancing, it was about understanding the limitations placed on them by the industry and choosing, for a moment, to break free. As Elvis left Dean's dressing room that night, he turned to his friend and said, "Thanks for everything. You really showed me something I didn't know I needed to see." Dean nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Anytime, kid." The next morning, Elvis was waiting outside Dean's rehearsal space, eager to continue what they had started the night before. While the Sands Hotel was buzzing with news of their impromptu dance-off, Dean and Elvis had made a silent agreement. Their bond had grown beyond performance and showmanship. And they had uncovered something deeper, something about themselves that they had long kept hidden away from the public eye. It was more than just a dance-off. It was a shared moment of vulnerability, of two men pushing past the images that the world had made for them. They were both stars, icons. But that night, they were just two people challenging each other to be more. Elvis, who had spent years trying to break free from the box that the public had placed him in, found solace in Dean's advice. Dean, having spent decades under the Hollywood microscope, hiding his true talents to fit the smooth, sophisticated image that the world wanted, was now free from that weight. The freedom to express themselves fully, whether through dance, music, or simple conversation, was something they both craved. And they were no longer defined by the roles others had written for them. And so, for the next few weeks, Elvis and Dean became regulars at an empty rehearsal space, meeting every morning at 9 a.m., with just a piano player and their shared goal of personal discovery. At first, the mornings were awkward. Neither of them knew exactly where to begin. Dean, who had buried his dance moves for so long, had to teach himself how to let go again. His feet, which had once been so sure and fast on the dance floors of Ohio, were rusty, and Elvis, ever the perfectionist, could see that. But rather than criticize, Elvis simply encouraged. "It's all about the rhythm, Dean. Feel it in your bones. Your feet will follow." Dean smiled at this, realizing how different Elvis was from the image he had first assumed. The young man wasn't just a rock and roll rebel, and he was a student of the art, just like Dean had been. And Elvis, too, had to shed his own persona, the king of rock and roll, who everyone expected to give them that electrifying, seductive performance every time he stepped on stage. He wanted more than the hips and the hips alone. He wanted to learn how to connect with his audience in a deeper way, to show them more of himself. Dean's teachings, rooted in the classic forms of tap and swing, helped him see that the art of dance wasn't just about showmanship. It was about connection, timing, and the way each movement told a story. It was about moving with purpose, not simply to entertain, but to communicate with every step. For weeks, the two men would meet, working through various routines and challenging each other to improve. They spent hours refining moves, exchanging ideas, laughing at their mistakes and pushing each other to explore new techniques. Elvis, the once invincible rock star, was now humbled by the complexity of dance. Dean, who had once been the smoothest operator in Hollywood, now found himself rediscovering an old love that had long been buried beneath the weight of fame and expectation. Together, they learned that greatness didn't lie in the personas they had built for themselves. It lay in their ability to push past the limitations of their public images and uncover the truth about who they were as artists and human beings. And in those quiet moments after practice, when they would sit on the floor, sipping coffee or sharing a cigarette, the bond between them grew stronger. They shared stories from their youth, stories of struggle, ambition, and dreams that had been crushed by the demands of fame. Dean spoke of his early days in Ohio, of dancing to make ends meet, of the people who had told him he would never make it. Elvis shared his fears about being trapped in the image of the rebellious teen idol, about how every time he tried to branch out, the industry pushed him back into the safe, predictable mold of rock and roll. They both laughed at the absurdity of their situations, realizing how much they had in common despite their differences. As the days turned into weeks, their friendship deepened. It was no longer about competition or proving who was the better performer. It was about mutual respect, shared wisdom, and the recognition that they were both more than the public had ever allowed them to be. Elvis began to explore new musical genres during his rehearsals, experimenting with gospel, blues, and ballads that had always been close to his heart. Dean, who had been defined by his wit and charm, began to open up about his true self, showing Elvis the complexities of his past, the struggles and the sacrifices that had led him to Hollywood. Their connection, built on the foundation of shared vulnerability and a desire to break free from the boxes that the world had placed them in, soon became something neither of them could ignore. What had started as a casual challenge on stage had transformed into a genuine friendship that transcended the world of entertainment. They were no longer just two icons meeting in the bright lights of Vegas. They were two human beings who had found comfort in each other's company and strength in each other's encouragement. Elvis's transformation, however, wasn't just confined to the rehearsal room. His newfound confidence began to show in his performances as well. The 1968 comeback special, which Elvis had been hesitant to create, became a turning point in his career. He had the courage to explore different sides of himself, not just the rock star persona that had made him famous, but the man behind the microphone, the artist with a voice that could soothe, inspire, and uplift. Elvis had always been more than just his hip-swiveling antics. His voice had the depth to carry the weight of gospel and blues, and his range extended far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The special showed the world a different side of Elvis Presley, one that was vulnerable, genuine, and multifaceted. While Elvis was in front of the camera, pushing the boundaries of what his fans expected, Dean was quietly observing. He saw the changes in Elvis and couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had been there to help Elvis break free from the chains of expectation, to show him that it was okay to step outside the box, to embrace different sides of himself. Elvis's success with the comeback special was not just a triumph for him. It was a triumph for their friendship, for the lessons they had shared in those early mornings together in the rehearsal room. In the years that followed, the bond between them remained strong. They never appeared together publicly again, but their friendship was real, grounded in the quiet moments when the cameras were off and the world wasn't watching. They continued to support each other in subtle ways, with Elvis sending Dean letters and gifts, and Dean offering Elvis advice when the pressures of fame became too much to handle. It was a friendship built on mutual respect and understanding, and neither man took it for granted. When Dean's son, Dean Paul, tragically died in a plane crash in 1987, it was Elvis's daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, who reached out to Dean. She sent a letter to Dean, thanking him for the influence he had on her father. In it, she wrote, "My father always spoke about you with such admiration, and I know he learned so much from you, not just about performing, but about living life on his own terms." Dean, now in his later years, kept that letter close, remembering the lessons he had imparted to Elvis all those years ago. It was a reminder that their bond had transcended their time in Las Vegas, their time in the spotlight. It had become something more personal, something that lasted beyond the noise of fame. Dean Martin and Elvis Presley, two of the most iconic figures in the history of entertainment, had shared a moment that no one could have predicted, a dance-off that became the stuff of legend. But what mattered most about that night wasn't the performance. It wasn't the hip swivels or the backflips or the splits. It was the truth that was revealed in that brief, spontaneous exchange. For a moment, both men broke free from the roles that the world had cast them in. They showed each other and the audience that there was more to them than the images they had been forced to wear. The dance-off became a symbol of liberation, of breaking free from the expectations that bound them. It was a lesson that resonated long after the show ended. It reminded everyone in the audience that legends aren't just born from their personas. They are born from the courage to be vulnerable, to show their full selves, and to embrace every facet of their being, even the parts they had hidden away for years. As the years passed, the story of that night grew into a legend, passed down from one generation to the next. Those who were in the audience that night remembered it not for the spectacle, but for the moment when two men, at the peak of their careers, decided to show the world who they truly were. They weren't just entertainers. They were human beings, complex and multidimensional, full of surprises and hidden talents. And that, in the end, is what made the moment legendary. Dean Martin may have died in 1995, but the story of his dance-off with Elvis Presley lives on as a reminder that the greatest performances happen when we stop performing, when we drop the act, when we let go of the image, and when we allow ourselves to be truly real. It's a story about breaking free from the boxes that others place us in and finding the courage to show the world all that we are. In the end, both Elvis and Dean became more than what the world expected, and that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy they could have left behind. A legacy not of image, but of authenticity, of choosing to be more than what others saw and inspiring everyone around them to do the same. As the years rolled on, the friendship between Dean Martin and Elvis Presley deepened into something far more profound than either of them had ever anticipated. While they had initially come together out of mutual respect for each other's craft, what followed was a relationship that transcended their roles as entertainers. They had seen through each other's public images, breaking the walls down between them, revealing the layers of vulnerability and uncertainty that even the brightest stars carried with them. Dean had pushed Elvis to show more of himself on stage, to take risks, and to stop worrying about the labels that society had put on him. In return, Elvis had shown Dean the power of connection, of being truly present with his audience, and how to embrace the vitality of youth and passion, even when time seemed to have passed him by. They taught each other lessons that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with living a life fully, without apology. Elvis's breakthrough with the '68 comeback special was just the beginning of the shift in his career, and it was a moment he credited privately to Dean Martin, not as a mentor in the traditional sense, but as a friend who saw him for who he truly was. Elvis, at that point in his career, had begun to break free from the tight constraints that had defined him for so long. While the public had adored the young, hip-swiveling Elvis, the real Elvis, full of complexities, interests, and hidden talents, was starting to emerge. He no longer felt the need to adhere to the rebellious image he had been forced into, nor did he feel trapped by the expectations of his fans and managers. Then the advice from Dean had unlocked something inside him that was more than just rebellion or youthful defiance. It was the freedom to be more than what the world demanded. Dean, too, found solace in his connection with Elvis. The years of playing it safe, of being the suave, sophisticated entertainer who was always in control, began to feel hollow. He had buried so much of himself for the sake of his Hollywood image, his dancing, his past, his true nature. But with Elvis's encouragement and their shared moments of real connection, Dean began to understand the importance of stepping out of the box. It was no longer just about being the smooth, charming crooner. It was about embracing every aspect of who he was, even the parts that had been lost to time. Elvis had reminded Dean that he didn't need to live in the shadow of his past, but rather celebrate it. The lessons they exchanged in the quiet of the rehearsal rooms went far beyond music and dance. They were about living authentically and with courage. As the months passed, their friendship continued in subtle ways. Elvis's visits to Dean's rehearsals became less about learning new dance moves and more about sharing life's challenges and victories. It wasn't long before Elvis's confidence, which had once been marred by his constant struggle with the industry, was fully restored. Dean's steady, grounded perspective on fame and success helped Elvis embrace the idea that his identity didn't have to be shaped by the public's expectations. He didn't have to be the king of rock and roll at all times. He could be vulnerable, creative, and diverse without losing the essence of who he was. And this was a turning point in Elvis's career, as it led to his exploration of new genres, film roles that allowed him to flex his acting muscles, and the deeper connection with his audience that he had long yearned for. Meanwhile, Dean continued to perform, but the pressures of Hollywood began to fade. The rat race, the demands of television appearances, and the constant need to live up to the cool persona that had made him famous started to feel irrelevant. What was most important to him now wasn't the applause from the audience, but the authenticity he had found in his friendship with Elvis. It was something that had been missing from his life for years. Through Elvis, he had rediscovered the importance of being genuine, not just for the camera, but for himself. For both men, their experiences together became a quiet revolution. A revolution that did not need to be broadcasted, but one that had quietly reshaped their lives. And though they both continued to shine in their respective fields, what remained most significant about their relationship was the deep bond they had formed. The dance-off was a catalyst, a moment of spontaneity that sparked something in both of them. It had become a symbol of the freedom to be more than what people saw, more than what they expected. As time went on, their paths diverged in different directions, but the influence they had on each other never waned. Dean continued to perform sporadically, but the demands of fame had long since lost their hold on him. Elvis, on the other hand, went through several phases of reinvention, shifting between genres and even experimenting with film projects that challenged his image. Yet, regardless of where their respective careers took them, both men had gained something far more valuable than fame. They had gained each other's respect, something that had eluded them for much of their lives in the limelight. They had both started to see that they were more than their public personas, more than the images that the world had decided they should be. Dean's influence on Elvis went beyond just teaching him to dance. It was about embracing all the sides of himself that had been hidden or suppressed for so long, and it was about living without fear of breaking free from the boxes people tried to put them in. The bond they shared wasn't publicized. It wasn't something they felt the need to flaunt. They didn't need to tell the world how much they meant to each other. It was in the small, private moments, the quiet rehearsals in the morning, the conversations between songs, the shared understanding that neither of them was truly seen for who they were by the world. But in each other, they found someone who understood, who saw the complexity of their souls, and that was enough. Elvis went on to record the '68 Comeback Special, which revitalized his career and cemented his status as one of the most versatile artists of his time. It was a career-defining moment, but the impact of that special went beyond the music. It showed the world that Elvis Presley was more than just a teen idol, that he was an artist capable of transcending the limitations placed on him by the industry, that he was able to look beyond the confines of the Elvis persona and embrace the depth of his abilities. Dean, too, continued to enjoy his life, away from the limelight that had once consumed him. He was content in the quiet corners of his life, savoring the friendships he had forged and the lessons he had learned. He had stepped out of the shadow of the public image he had been forced to wear for so long. In his later years, when he was asked about his legacy, he would often refer back to that moment in Vegas. He knew that the dance-off wasn't just a performance. It had been a turning point for both him and Elvis. It was a moment when they had both chosen to break free from the boxes that the world had placed them in, to show the world their full, authentic selves. Dean's legacy, like Elvis's, had lived on in the quiet moments they shared, the lessons they passed on to each other, the wisdom they had gained, and the courage to live authentically. In the final years of his life, Dean Martin remained a figure of quiet dignity, content in his role as an entertainer, but never one to chase the fame that had once been his. He spent his time with those he loved, reflecting on the life he had lived, and in those final years Elvis continued to honor the lessons Dean had taught him. He carried those lessons with him as he navigated his own struggles with fame, always remembering that the greatest gift Dean had given him was the courage to be himself, unapologetically. When Dean passed away in 1995, the world mourned the loss of a man who had given so much of himself to the world of entertainment. But those who knew him best, those who had witnessed his true self, knew that his greatest gift wasn't the music, the films, or the Rat Pack legacy. His gift was in his willingness to show his true self to the world, in those fleeting moments of authenticity that could never be planned or predicted. Elvis, too, passed away in 1977, and though their time together was short, the impact of their bond continued to echo in the lives of those who knew them. Dean and Elvis's friendship became a symbol of the importance of being more than what the world tells you to be. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest legacy isn't built on fame or fortune, but on the courage to break free from expectations and live as your true self. And so, as the years passed, the story of the dance-off between Dean Martin and Elvis Presley remained a legendary moment, not just because of the spectacle, but because of the lesson it taught the world. It reminded us that we are all more than the images we create for others, and sometimes the most remarkable performances happen when we stop performing and start being real.